Exhausted and broke, she was just a waitress, one shift away from eviction, when a homeless veteran walked in, clutching 2 crumpled dollar bills. What security cameras silently captured next would transform both their lives forever. When her manager discovered her secret act of compassion, he tried to punish her, never imagining that within 24 hours, the world would be watching. One quiet moment of kindness at a forgotten diner counter would ignite a movement that reminded millions what we're capable of when we truly see each other. 4 a.m. at Millie's Diner. Samantha Miller wiped the counter for the 7th time that hour, her reflection faint in the polished surface, exhaustion etched into features too young for such weariness. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Her constant companion in the quiet hours when the world slept and she worked. "Order up, Sam," Hector called from the kitchen, sliding a plate of eggs and hash browns through the window. Her smile never wavered as she delivered the food to the lone trucker hunched over his coffee. 20 years behind the wheel, he told her. She wondered if her own journey had left similar marks, not on her body, but somewhere deeper. The bell above the door chimed. Another customer, another smile, another chance for a tip that might, just might, help with the rent notice burning a hole in her pocket. 3 days late, 3 days closer to nowhere. The diner sat at the crossroads of Highway 16 and Main Street, a beacon of warmth in a town that industry had forgotten. Like so many others, Samantha had planned to pass through. 5 years later, she was still here, caught in the gravity of survival. Her apartment was 4 blocks away, a single room above the laundromat where the rhythmic tumble of industrial dryers lulled her to sleep during the few precious hours she wasn't working. The walls were thin, but the rent had been manageable, until it wasn't. "You're doing a double again?" Marcy asked, arriving for her shift, concern folding the corners of her eyes. Samantha nodded, tucking a strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear. Bills don't pay themselves. What she didn't say was that yesterday's mail had brought a final notice from the electric company, or that her mother's medication had gone up again, eating into what little she managed to send home each month. The morning rush began. Factory workers, early office staff, regulars whose orders she knew by heart. Samantha moved with practiced efficiency, her worn sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. Every smile was genuine, every honey and sweetheart authentic, small kindnesses she could still afford to give. At the corner booth, Mr. Henderson nursed his coffee, meticulously counting quarters for his breakfast. His hands trembled. Parkinson's, he'd once told her after she'd pretended not to notice the spilled coffee. "The usual?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Just coffee today, Samantha." His voice carried the weight of his own private battles. There was shame in his eyes, a reflection she recognized from her own mirror. The shame of not enough, of barely hanging on. She turned back toward the kitchen, made sure no one was watching, then grabbed a plate and whispered to Hector. 5 minutes later, she set a full breakfast before Mr. Henderson. "I didn't order," he began. "Kitchen mistake," she said with a wink. "Would be a shame to waste it." His eyes watered, but his dignity remained intact. This dance they'd done before. The clock ticked toward noon, and Samantha's feet throbbed in protest. 8 hours down, 8 more to go. The rent notice seemed to pulse in her pocket, alongside the electricity bill and the reminder of her mother's voice on the phone last night. "I'm fine, baby. Don't you worry about me." But she did worry. About her mother back home. About Mr. Henderson and his counted quarters. About the young family in the booth by the window, sharing a single meal between 3 people. As she refilled coffee cups, she calculated figures in her head. Tips so far today, hours remaining this week, dollars needed by Monday. The math never worked out. No matter how she arranged the numbers. The world saw a waitress, efficient, pleasant, unremarkable. They didn't see her stopping by the hospital after work to read to elderly patients with no visitors. They didn't. See her slipping extra bacon onto children's plates when parents weren't looking. They didn't see the night classes she'd abandoned when the tuition increased. Samantha Miller, 28 years old, invisible in plain sight, a tapestry of kindness woven through exhaustion. The bell above the door chimed again. Another customer, another smile, just another shift at Millie's diner, just another day of giving from an empty cup. The dinner rush had faded, leaving Millie's diner in that strange limbo between evening and true night. Rain tapped against the windows, transforming the neon signs outside into watercolor smears across the glass. Samantha's muscles ached as she restocked the sugar packets, her mind drifting to the bills waiting in her apartment. The doorbell chimed, pulling her from calculations that never balanced. A man stood in the threshold, hesitating as water dripped from his worn military jacket onto the worn linoleum floor. He glanced around with the caution of someone who had learned the hard way that not all spaces were welcoming. His beard was unkempt but trimmed, as if fighting a losing battle against circumstance. Despite the obvious signs of hardship, there was something in his posture, a remnant of discipline, of a life before whatever storm had swept him here. "Come on in," Samantha called, her smile genuine. "Find any seat you like." He moved carefully, his boots leaving faint wet prints that seemed to embarrass him. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple in the corner booth and Ted, the night shift security guard from the warehouse down the street. The stranger chose the stool farthest from the door but closest to the exit, a tactical choice that didn't escape Samantha's notice. She approached with a menu and a fresh mug, coffee pot already in hand. "Evening," she said. "Coffee to start?" His eyes, clear blue despite the redness around them, flickered with surprise at the simple kindness. He placed his hands flat on the counter, and Samantha noticed the dirt beneath his fingernails wasn't fresh. This was a man who tried to stay lean but had limited options. His wedding band had left a permanent mark, though the ring itself was gone. His voice cracked unused. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I have $2. He placed the crumpled bills on the counter with careful precision. "What can I get for that?" Something twisted in Samantha's chest. She recognized the look in his eyes, not just hunger for food, but hunger for dignity. She'd seen it in her mother's face when illness had taken her job. She'd seen it in the mirror during those first months after moving here, before she'd found Millie's. His fingers trembled slightly as they rested beside the worn bills. She spotted the edge of a faded tattoo on his wrist, military insignia, partially hidden by his sleeve. $2, she repeated thoughtfully, glancing at the menu board, though she knew every price by heart. The cheapest item was the soup at $4.99. Behind her, she could feel Marty watching from the kitchen. His policy on handouts made clear during her first week. 3 servers had been fired last year for giving away food. The stranger's gaze dropped to the counter, a flush creeping up his neck. "Maybe just a coffee then," he murmured. Samantha saw the hunger he tried to hide, saw how his shoulders curved inward, how his frame, once solid, she guessed, had hollowed. In that moment, she wasn't seeing a homeless man. She was seeing someone's son, maybe someone's father, definitely someone who had once stood straight in a uniform. "Actually," she said, voice brightening, "you're in luck. We've got a special tonight." She turned toward the kitchen, blocking Marty's view with her body as she scribbled on the order pad. Soup, sandwich, side. Ring as employee meal. She slid it through the window with a meaningful look at Hector, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "For $2, you can get our soup and sandwich combo," she continued, pouring coffee into his mug. How special, not advertised. Distrust flickered across his features, a man unaccustomed to good fortune. "That doesn't sound right." "Tuesday night special," she said firmly. Managers trying something new to bring in customers during slow hours. He studied her face, searching for the lie, for the mockery. Finding neither, he nodded once, a small dignity afforded. "Thank you." As she walked away to check on her other tables, Samantha did the mental calculation. That would be $8.75 from her tips, almost an hour's worth. Part of tomorrow's electric bill. Worth it. Behind her, the quiet stranger wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, absorbing its warmth like a prayer. 15 minutes passed. The kitchen doorbell chimed. Samantha lifted the tray with practiced ease, balancing it against her forearm as she made her way back to the counter. Steam rose from the bowl of chicken noodle soup, carrying with it the scent of home, of comfort wrapped in warmth. Beside it sat a thick turkey sandwich on sourdough, golden brown and overstuffed, with a side of crisp fries that Hector had made extra fresh. It was more than she'd promised, more than the menu's standard offering. The stranger's eyes widened slightly, the only betrayal of emotion on a face that had clearly learned to guard its reactions. His gaze moved from the food to Samantha, then back again, as if reconciling the bounty before him with the 2 crumpled dollar bills still sitting on the counter. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice low, tinged with the gravel of disuse. Samantha set the plate down carefully. "No mistake, Tuesday night special." In the corner of the ceiling, the red light of the security camera blinked steadily, its unblinking eye capturing the moment. Marty had installed them last year, after the register came up short. "To keep everyone honest," he'd said. Though his gaze had lingered on the waitstaff, the stranger's fingers curled slightly, not yet reaching for the food. "I don't understand." Behind the counter, Samantha's hand slipped into her apron pocket, feeling the edges of her tips from the day, money that had been earmarked for the electric bill, for her mother's medication. She pulled out a $10 bill and slid it into the register when Marty wasn't looking, punching in the code for an employee meal. $8.75 plus tax. The drawer closed with a soft finality. She wouldn't go home tonight and tell anyone about this moment. There would be no social media post, no call to a news station about her good deed. Some acts of kindness were meant to be silent, private exchanges between souls who recognized something in each other. "Nothing to understand," she said, sliding a set of silverware wrapped in a napkin toward him. "Just enjoy it while it's hot." He didn't move immediately. Instead, he studied her face with an intensity that might have made her uncomfortable in another context. But there was no threat in his gaze, only a profound bewilderment, as if kindness without an agenda had become so foreign that he couldn't quite trust its existence. "Why?" The question was barely audible. Samantha thought of her brother overseas, wondering if strangers showed him kindness in unfamiliar places. She thought of her mother, who had taught her that generosity wasn't measured by what you could afford to give, but by what you couldn't afford to withhold. "Because everybody deserves a hot meal," she answered simply. Then, seeing his hesitation continue, she added gently, "It would be a shame to let Hector's cooking go to waste. Best soup in 3 counties. Something shifted in the man's posture. A small surrender. He reached for the spoon, and Samantha caught sight of something else on his wrist as his sleeve pulled back. Not just a military tattoo, but the edge of a hospital bracelet, still clinging to his skin. The security camera recorded it all silently. The way the man's hand trembled as he took the first spoonful, the way his eyes closed briefly at the taste, the way Samantha turned away to give him privacy with his emotion, busying herself with wiping down already clean counters. It captured the moment he set the spoon down halfway through and covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking almost imperceptibly. It captured Samantha sliding a glass of water toward him without comment, her own eyes glistening. It captured the silent exchange between 2 humans, one giving what she couldn't afford, one receiving what he couldn't ask for. Neither of them knew they were being recorded. Neither of them knew that eyes beyond the diner walls would someday witness this quiet moment. Neither of them were performing for an audience. This was simply humanity at its most raw, unfiltered, unedited, unplanned, and the camera caught it all. Closing time approached. Samantha wiped down the last table, her muscles protesting after the double shift. The veteran had left hours ago, his place at the counter now empty save for a carefully arranged set of utensils and a napkin folded with military precision. He'd nodded to her before leaving, words seemingly trapped behind a wall of pride and gratitude too complex to navigate. The neon open sign flickered off. Tuesday night complete. 1 day closer to rent being due. Samantha. Marty's voice cut through the quiet diner like a blade. My office, now. She froze, recognition washing over her. The cameras, the register, the meal. She set down her cleaning. Ragan followed him to the cramped back office, where boxes of supplies created narrow pathways to a metal desk. The room smelled of cigarettes, though Marty had quit 3 years ago. The security monitor glowed with paused footage, her face clearly visible as she slid money into the register. Explain this. His finger jabbed at the screen, voice tight with barely contained anger. Samantha's throat went dry. I bought a meal for a customer. Using employee discount, Marty's face reddened. That's for your meals, not for giving away food to bums. The word hit her like a physical blow. He wasn't... I saw the footage, Samantha. I'm not blind. Marty leaned back in his chair, the springs protesting. Know what happens when word gets out we're feeding homeless for free? They all show up. This isn't a soup kitchen. On the screen, frozen in time, was her act of kindness reduced to a transgression. The camera hadn't captured the hospital bracelet. It hadn't captured the veteran's eyes or the way his hands had trembled. He had money, she said quietly. He paid $2, Marty scoffed, for a $12 meal. The air conditioner hummed in the background, filling the silence between them. Outside, a car horn honked, the sound muffled and distant. You know the rules. Marty tapped a pen against the desk in sharp staccato beats. No handouts, no charity, no exceptions. Samantha thought of the man's weathered face, the way dignity had straightened his spine as he'd eaten. She could explain. Tell Marty about the military tattoo, the hospital bracelet. Maybe it would soften him, but something held her back. The veteran's privacy wasn't hers to sacrifice, even to save herself. I bought him dinner, she repeated, meeting Marty's gaze. With my money. Using company discount, he countered. That's theft of services. The word hung between them. Theft. So, contrary to what had actually happened, that Samantha almost laughed. Instead, she stood straighter, channeling the same quiet dignity she'd recognized in her customer. I'll pay the difference, she said. Marty's eyes narrowed. That's not the point, and you know it. Rules exist for a reason. He pulled out a form from his desk. Employee disciplinary action. First offense is a written warning. Second is termination. The form blurred before her eyes. A warning meant potential termination later. Termination meant no job. No job meant no apartment. No apartment meant... Her mother's voice echoed in. Her mind... Standing for something always costs something, baby. Question is whether you can afford not to stand. Marty pushed the form across the desk along with a pen. Sign it, and if I see you pull this stunt again, you're done. The pen felt heavy in her hand. One signature, and she could keep her job, keep her apartment, keep sending money home. All it would cost was acknowledging she'd done something wrong when every fiber of her being knew she hadn't. I need this signature. Samantha, now. I've got inventory to finish. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping against the window like a reminder of the veteran who had arrived rain-soaked and hungry. Who was he? Marty asked suddenly. Someone you knew? She could have said yes, made up a story. Old family friend, distant relative, someone from church. Any explanation that might have humanized the man in Marty's eyes. Instead, she simply shook her head. Just a hungry person. The pen hovered over the paper, trembling slightly in her grasp. Her signature would be a betrayal of something fundamental, a denial of her own compass. Lightning flashed outside, momentarily brightening the cramped office, illuminating the choice before her. Miguel's shift had ended 2 hours ago, but he lingered in the break room, eyes fixed on the small security monitor. As Millie's night cook, he wasn't supposed to access the footage, but Hector had let slip what happened between Samantha and Marty. The passcode wasn't hard to figure out. Marty's birthday, always Marty's birthday. The screen flickered as Miguel rewound the day's recording, searching until he found it. Samantha at the register, the homeless veteran at the counter, a moment of humanity captured in harsh, grainy black and white. His finger hovered over his phone. What he was about to do could cost him his job, could cost Samantha hers, but some things mattered more. The camera angle revealed what Marty had missed. Samantha reaching into her own pocket, pulling out what was clearly her tip money, carefully sliding it into the register. The close-up showed her hand trembling slightly as she rang up the meal, then discreetly tucking the receipt into her apron rather than giving it to the customer. Miguel's jaw tightened. He'd worked alongside Samantha for 3 years, watched her stay late without complaint, cover shifts for single mothers, slip extra food to elderly customers who counted pennies for coffee. Now she was facing termination for an act of kindness that had come from her own pocket. "You still here?" The janitor's voice startled him. Miguel quickly switched off the monitor. "Just grabbing my jacket." Outside, sitting in his car, Miguel made his decision. He uploaded the clip to his social media account, not for views or attention, but because some truths needed witnesses. His caption was simple: "Waitress uses her tips to feed homeless veteran, gets written up. This is the America I know, both the cruelty and the kindness." He added no hashtags, tagged no celebrities, named no diner. This wasn't about viral fame. It was about justice. He drove home through the rain, unaware that digital ripples were already spreading outward. 17 a.m. 3 shares became 17. A night shift nurse in Arizona watched it during her break, tears welling as she thought of the veterans in her care. AM. 17 shares became 106. A truck driver at a rest stop outside Tulsa clicked share before climbing back into his rig, thinking of his brother who'd never quite recovered after Afghanistan. To 15 a.m., the morning news cycle hungry for content. An associate producer flagged the video, now at 12,000 views. "Get me a location," her boss demanded, "and the waitress's name." Samantha woke to her alarm, unaware that her face was traveling across screens throughout the country. The morning light filtered through her thin curtains as she moved through her routine. Shower, coffee, simple makeup to hide the exhaustion. Her signed disciplinary form sat on her dresser, a reminder of last night's surrender to practicality. "It's at 1 million views," Hector whispered, sliding his phone across the counter during the mid-morning lull. 1 million, Samantha. She stared at the screen, at her own grainy image now familiar to strangers across the country. 24 hours. That's all it had taken for her private moment of compassion to become public property, dissected and shared and commented upon by people who had never set foot in Millie's diner. The bell above the door chimed. Samantha quickly handed the phone back to Hector, pasting on her professional smile as she turned, only to freeze at the sight of a woman holding a microphone, a man with a camera balanced on his shoulder behind her. "Samantha Miller?" The reporter's smile was practiced, perfect. "Diane Reeves, Channel 7 News. We'd love to talk to you about what people are calling the Waitress with a Heart of Gold video." The camera's red light blinked on, capturing Samantha's stunned expression. In the kitchen, plates clattered as staff members peered through the service window. "I'm working," Samantha managed, aware of Marty emerging from his office, his face a storm cloud. In living rooms across America, the story played between commercials for car insurance and laundry detergent. A simple act of kindness has captured the nation's attention, the anchor intoned over footage now enhanced, cleaned up, slowed down for maximum emotional impact. A waitress at a local diner used her own tip money to provide a hot meal for a homeless veteran. What she didn't know was that security cameras were rolling and that her compassion would strike a chord with millions. Cut to an interview with a customer. She's always been like that, always putting others first. Cut to a social media expert. What makes this video so powerful is its authenticity. She clearly had no idea she was being recorded. This wasn't performative charity. Cut to comments scrolling across the screen. Faith in humanity restored. "I'm literally crying right now. This is the America I want to live in. Someone find this woman and start a GoFundMe." By noon, the diner was packed, customers ordering coffee just for a chance to see the waitress from the video in person. Samantha moved between tables in a daze, aware of phones discreetly recording her, of whispered conversations trailing in her wake. Marty had vanished into his office after the news crew left, the door firmly closed. His silence was more unnerving than any reprimand. "You're trending on Twitter," Marcy told her during a rare moment of respite by the coffee machine. "And someone started a fundraiser for you. It's at $30,000 already." The numbers seemed unreal, disconnected from the reality of Samantha's aching feet and the rent notice still waiting at home. $30,000. More money than she'd see in a year of doubles and graveyard shifts. "I didn't do anything special," she protested, the phrase becoming a mantra as the day wore on, as more reporters arrived, as customers pressed bills into her hands with tears in their eyes. "You did what we all wish we would do," an elderly woman told her, squeezing her hand. "You saw someone's humanity when the rest of the world looked away." At 3 o'clock, the major networks picked up the story. In a world that often feels divided, a simple act of kindness has united millions, the anchor announced over B-roll of Millie's diner, now surrounded by news vans. The video, which has reached 10 million views in less than 48 hours, shows waitress Samantha Miller using her own hard-earned tips to feed a homeless veteran. Split screen, analysis from a retired general about veteran homelessness statistics. A psychologist discussing the neurological impact of witnessing acts of altruism. A social researcher examining the power of everyday heroes in troubled times. The story grew, expanding beyond Samantha, beyond Millie's diner, becoming a canvas onto which a weary nation projected its hopes and values and guilt. Samantha's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Talk shows, podcasts, morning programs. Everyone wanted 5 minutes with the waitress who hadn't known she was being filmed, whose simple act of kindness had become a symbol for something larger, something the country seemed desperate to believe still existed. She silenced it, slipping it into her pocket as she delivered a tuna melt to table 6. The customer, a businessman in an expensive suit, looked up from his laptop and recognized her. "It's you," he said softly, "the waitress from the video." Samantha nodded, uncomfortable, with the recognition in his eyes. "My son," the man continued, voice thick with emotion. "He served in Iraq, came home different. We lost touch. I keep hoping." He trailed off, then reached for his wallet. "This is for you, for what you did." The $100 bill seemed to hover between them, a tangible manifestation of something intangible passing from one soul to another. "Just doing my job, sir," Samantha said, but accepted the money with grace, understanding it wasn't really about her at all. Outside Millie's diner, the crowd continued to grow, drawn by a 60-second clip of a moment never meant to be shared. Samantha's phone died midway through her shift, the battery drained by the constant flood of notifications. She stuffed it into her locker, grateful for the silence. Outside Millie's diner, the world was anything but quiet. Waitress Hero trended at #1. Her simple act of compassion had sparked something primal in the digital consciousness, a hunger for goodness in a landscape often dominated by conflict. On TikTok, the security footage had been set to swelling orchestral music, slowed down at the moment she slid her tips into the register, captioned with, "She thought no one was watching, but we all needed to see this." 20 million views, 30 million. The numbers ceased to have meaning. In a studio in Los Angeles, a talk show host held up a tablet displaying the now famous image. "This, folks, is what America is really about," she said to thunderous applause. "Not the politics, not the fighting, but ordinary people doing extraordinary things when they think no one's looking." In New York, a morning show panel discussed the phenomenon. "What strikes me," said the veteran correspondent, "is that she never intended this to be seen. There's no performative element here. In an age of carefully curated charity for social media, this woman gave from her heart." In Nashville, a country music star strummed his guitar and sang an impromptu verse about a waitress with hands like her mama's and a heart made of gold. And on military bases across the country, service members shared the video in barracks and mess halls, nodding in silent recognition of what it meant to see one of their own acknowledged. "That could have been me," a retired Marine told his local news station, voice breaking. "After my 3rd tour, before I got help, that could have been me at that counter." At Millie's diner, the phone rang continuously. Marcy fielded calls with growing disbelief. "A Hollywood producer wants to option your life story," she told Samantha during a rare moment of quiet behind the counter. "And 3 different veterans organizations want you as their spokesperson." Samantha shook her head, overwhelmed. "I just bought the man dinner, but the world had decided it was more than that. It was a symbol, a parable, a 2-minute reminder of humanity in an algorithm-driven landscape starved for authenticity." Hector burst through the kitchen doors, waving his phone. "Someone started a GoFundMe for you last night. Guess how much it's raised?" Before Samantha could respond, he turned the screen toward her. The figure displayed made her knees buckle. $247,165. And climbing by the minute. "This can't be real," she whispered, but it was. Comments from donors scrolled endlessly. "My father was a Vietnam vet who struggled. Thank you for seeing them when others look away. Using my lunch money for the week to donate. Worth it. From one service member to a true American hero. Thank you for your compassion." The mail carrier arrived at Millie's with a postal bin, filled to overflowing. Cards, letters, small packages addressed simply to the waitress or waitress hero or Samantha at Millie's diner. Envelopes contained cash, gift cards, handwritten notes of gratitude. A child's crayon drawing showed a figure in a blue dress with a yellow halo. A Vietnam veteran sent his purple heart with a note that read, "You earned this more than I did." As Samantha stared at the mountain of mail, a black SUV pulled up outside. A woman in a tailored suit stepped out, followed by a man carrying a briefcase. "Ms. Miller?" The woman's handshake was firm. "I represent the Veterans Dignity Project. We've received an anonymous donation of $1 million in your name to establish a program for homeless veterans in your community." The world tilted slightly beneath Samantha's feet. One decision, one meal, one moment of seeing another human being when others had looked away. How could something so simple have sparked something so vast? In an apartment across town, a young woman hunched over her laptop, eyes gleaming with purpose. Jessica Chen, social media manager for a local nonprofit, had created the GoFundMe on a whim, never expecting it to exceed a few $1,000s. Now her phone was ringing with calls from national media. The crowdfunding platform had flagged the campaign for verification due to its unprecedented growth. "We need to get this money to her," Jessica murmured, typing frantically. "She needs to know what she's done." What Samantha had done, without intending to, was create a beacon that people across the digital landscape were desperate to follow home. 1 star. Manager punished waitress for feeding a veteran. Marty's face drained of color as he scrolled through the flood of new Yelp reviews. Overnight, Millie's Diner's pristine 4.7-star rating had plummeted to 1.8 stars. The disciplinary form he'd forced Samantha to sign had somehow leaked online, a photo taken in secret now circulating alongside the security footage. 2 pieces of evidence juxtaposed in digital courtrooms where judgment was swift and mercy scarce. Outside the diner windows, a small crowd had gathered. Not customers, protesters. Their handmade signs told a simple story. Support our veterans. Shame on management. Kindness shouldn't be punished. Marty pulled the blinds, his hands shaking. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was just following policy. The morning news cycle had found a villain for their heartwarming story. Analysts and commentators who had praised Samantha's compassion now directed equal fervor toward condemning the diner's management. What kind of establishment punishes an employee for an act of basic human decency? Demanded a retired colonel on a morning talk show. And toward a veteran, no less. Social media detectives had identified Marty within hours, his LinkedIn profile and Facebook page flooded with messages that ranged from disappointed to threatening. His cell phone rang constantly with unknown numbers. Someone had posted his home address in a comment thread. Inside Millie's, the phone hadn't stopped ringing. Monty fielded the calls with growing distress. "No, the manager isn't available." "No, we don't condone." "Yes, Samantha still works here." Her voice grew more brittle with each call. "I need you to make a statement," the PR consultant said, pacing the small office. Herbert Milligan, the elderly owner of Millie's Diner and 6 others across the state, had flown in on the first available flight after his corporate office alerted him to the crisis. "A statement saying what?" Marty asked, his defiance crumbling under Herbert's steely gaze. "Saying you made a terrible mistake," Herbert replied, adjusting his bow tie with fingers gnarled by arthritis. "Saying this isn't what Millie's stands." "Over." Marty's jaw tightened. "I was following corporate policy, your policy, no employee discounts for non-employees." Herbert's expression softened with something like pity. "Son, there's policy, and then there's humanity. You chose wrong." Outside the office window, a news van pulled up, the 3rd one that morning. The crowd of protesters had grown, their chants now audible through the walls. "Shame! Shame! Shame!" A brick crashed through the diner's front window, sending glass scattering across the checkered floor. Someone screamed. "This isn't what I wanted," Samantha told the police officer, taking her statement. Customers huddled in booths, some filming the chaos on their phones. "Nobody should be threatening anyone." The officer nodded sympathetically. "The internet doesn't do nuance, ma'am." Samantha watched as Herbert Milligan, a figure she'd only seen in the employee handbook photos, stepped outside to address the crowd, microphones thrust toward him like weapons. Effective immediately, his voice quavered but held firm, "Millie's Diner is proud to announce our new Veterans Meal Program. Any veteran in need can come to any of our locations and receive a hot meal, free of charge." The crowd's angry energy shifted, applause breaking out. Furthermore, Herbert continued, "The manager involved has been placed on administrative leave pending review." Cameras swiveled to capture Marty being escorted to his car by security, head bowed under the weight of becoming America's symbol for corporate callousness. Samantha slipped out the back door during the commotion, unable to bear witnessing Marty's public humiliation. For all his flaws, he was a man who'd worked his way up from dishwasher, who quietly paid for staff Christmas parties from his own pocket, who had once driven an elderly regular to her doctor's appointments when she could. No longer drive herself, but nuance didn't translate to viral outrage. The world needed a villain to complete their hero's journey, and Marty had been cast in the role. As she walked toward the bus stop, her phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "This is Jessica Chen. I started the GoFundMe that's now reached $389,000. We need to talk about what you want to do with the money." Samantha stared at the message, at the impossible number attached to her simple act of kindness. Behind her, Millie's diner, the place that had been her anchor for 5 years, was transformed into a symbol for a cultural war she never intended to start. All because she saw a hungry man and decided he deserved a hot meal. All because someone was watching when she thought no one was. The bell above the door chimed, a sound Samantha had heard thousands of times, but something about this particular chime made her look up from the coffee she was pouring, as if the universe itself had struck a different note. A man stood in the doorway, sunlight streaming in behind him, momentarily casting his face in shadow. He wore a clean button-down shirt, pressed khaki pants, and shoes that caught the light. His beard was gone, his hair neatly trimmed, but his eyes, those clear blue eyes that had once looked at her with such wary gratitude, were unmistakable. Robert. The coffee pot trembled slightly in Samantha's hand. The diner had quieted in the days since the window had been replaced, since Herbert had implemented the Veterans Meal Program, since Marty had been transferred to corporate headquarters for additional training. The media circus had mostly moved on to fresher stories, though Samantha still received letters every day. She set down the pot and moved toward the door, aware of the few customers watching with curious eyes. "Hello, Samantha," Robert said, his voice stronger than she remembered. He extended his hand, then seemed to think better of it, letting it fall back to his side. "I don't know if you remember me, but—" "I remember," she said softly. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the strange twist of fate that had linked their lives together through one simple transaction. "I saw the news," he said. "I never meant to cause all this." A quiet laugh escaped her. "Neither did I." They sat at the counter, the same spot where it had all begun. Robert with a cup of coffee, Samantha on the customer side for once, her apron still tied around her waist. Hector had insisted on covering her tables, winking as he shooed her away. "That night," Robert began, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug, "was my lowest point. I'd been out of the VA hospital for 3 days. They patched me up, but—" He tapped his temple. "Some wounds don't show." Samantha nodded, giving him space to continue. "I hadn't eaten in 2 days. Was too proud to go to a shelter." His eyes met hers directly. "That meal you gave me, it wasn't just food, it was dignity. Somebody seeing me as a person, not a problem." The security camera in the corner blinked silently, recording this reunion just as it had captured their first meeting. Later, this footage too would find its way online, completing the story the world had become invested in. "My sister saw a video," Robert continued. "She'd been looking for me since I disappeared after my 3rd tour. Hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. His voice caught. "She came and found me, brought me home." Outside the diner windows, life continued. Cars passing, pedestrians hurrying by, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding inside. How a single meal had reunited a family. How one moment of seeing beyond the surface had changed multiple lives. "I start a job next week," Robert said. "Construction, and I'm getting treatment at the VA again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin, an AA chip. 30 days sober. Tears welled in Samantha's eyes, not from pity, but from something purer, the recognition of a soul fighting its way back to light. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "and to give you this." He slid an envelope across the counter. Inside was a check, modest in comparison to the GoFundMe fortune now sitting in Samantha's newly opened bank account, but somehow more precious. "My first paycheck," Robert explained, "to pay you back for the meal." Samantha's hand covered his, a brief human contact bridging the space between giving and receiving, between past and future. "Keep it," she said. "You'll need it for your fresh start." Robert shook his head, a gentle stubbornness in his eyes. "Some debts need to be paid, not for the creditor, but for the debtor. My sponsor taught me that." The local news crew captured, their embrace on camera, a moment neither of them had planned, but which seemed written in the stars. The veteran and the waitress, brought together by chance, connected by compassion, now bound in the public imagination as symbols of what remained, possible in a fractured world. "What will you do with all that money?" Robert asked, as they stood outside the diner, where a small crowd had gathered upon recognizing them. Samantha looked back at Millie's, at the new sign in the window advertising the Veterans Meal Program, at the place that had been just a job, and now felt like the epicenter of something larger than herself. "I'm thinking of opening my own place," she said, surprising herself with the words as they formed. "A cafe where everyone's treated with dignity, no matter what's in their wallet." Robert smiled, a full, unguarded smile that transformed his face. "Save me a seat at the counter." Above them, the sky stretched endlessly blue, a canvas of possibility neither had been able to see just weeks before. The office building downtown stood 32 stories high, its glass exterior reflecting clouds and sky, a world away from the linoleum floors and coffee-scented air of Millie's diner. Samantha checked the address on her phone again, smoothed, her only blazer with nervous hands, and pushed through the revolving doors. "Ms. Miller," the receptionist smiled warmly, "they're expecting you on the 27th floor." The elevator rose silently, carrying Samantha toward a meeting she still didn't fully understand. The email had been formal but vague. "Veterans Horizon would like to discuss an opportunity with you." Her first instinct had been to decline. The GoFundMe money sat largely untouched in her account, her plans for a cafe taking tentative shape with Herbert Milligan's unexpected mentorship. But then Robert had called. "You should go," he'd said. "These people, they're the real deal. They helped me get into housing." The elevator doors opened to reveal a wall emblazoned with the Veterans Horizon logo, an American flag transformed into a rising sun. And standing there waiting was Robert himself, dressed in a suit she'd never seen, a visitor badge clipped to his lapel. "Surprise," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting in the half-smile she'd come to recognize. "They asked me to be here." Before Samantha could respond, a door opened and a woman in her 50s emerged, her silver hair cut in a practical bob, her handshake firm and direct. "Samantha Miller," she said. "I'm Colonel Margaret Whitfield, retired, founder of Veterans Horizon. Thank you for coming." The conference room windows offered a view of the entire city, from the industrial district where Millie's diner sat like a tiny island of warmth, to the river that curved like a silver ribbon toward the horizon. Around the polished table sat 5 people besides Samantha and Robert, Colonel Whitfield, 2 board members, a marketing director, and a young man taking notes on a laptop. "Do you know what we do here, Ms. Miller?" Colonel Whitfield asked, her voice carrying the gentle authority of someone accustomed to command. "You help veterans," Samantha answered simply. The colonel nodded. "We help veterans transition back to civilian life, housing, employment, healthcare, community." She leaned forward slightly. "But what we've discovered is that the most critical element isn't any of those tangible services. It's dignity, being seen as a person, not a statistic." Robert shifted in his seat, his eyes meeting Samantha's briefly. "Your interaction with Robert," the colonel continued, and the reaction it generated brought more attention to veteran dignity than our last 3 awareness campaigns combined. The marketing director slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of social media metrics, news clips, and a graph showing donations to veterans organizations nationwide, all spiking dramatically after the video went viral. "We've been searching for a way to humanize our mission," Colonel Whitfield said, "and then you two showed us how, without even trying." Samantha's throat tightened. "I just gave someone dinner." "No," Robert interjected, his voice soft but firm. "You gave me dignity when I'd forgotten what it felt like." The offer came as sunshine broke through clouds outside, sending patterns of light dancing across the conference table. "We want to create a new position," Colonel Whitfield explained. "Director of Outreach and Community Advocacy, someone who can connect with people, who understands both struggle and compassion, someone authentic." She slid another folder toward Samantha. "We want you, Ms. Miller." Samantha stared at the job description, at the salary figure that equaled 3 years of waitressing, at the benefits package that included the health care she'd gone without for so long. "But I'm not qualified," she whispered. "I don't have a degree or experience with—" "You have exactly the qualifications we need," the colonel interrupted gently. "Everything else can be taught." Robert leaned forward. "They've offered me a position too, peer counselor for newly discharged veterans. Who better to guide someone through darkness than someone who's found their way back to light?" The city stretched. Below them, a landscape of possibilities neither of them had been able to see from ground level, from the humble counter where their paths had crossed. "The kindness you showed," Colonel Whitfield said, "wasn't just a moment between 2 people. It was a reminder of what's possible when we truly see each other." Samantha thought of her mother's voice on the phone last night, tearful with pride, of Hector and Marcy at the diner encouraging her to spread her wings, of the disciplinary form that had seemed so threatening and now felt like a stepping stone on a path she couldn't have imagined. One meal, one decision, one moment of humanity. "When would I start?" she asked, her voice steady with newfound purpose. Outside the windows, the city, her city, seemed to expand with promise, with all the lives waiting to be touched, all the veterans waiting to be seen, not for their struggles, but for their inherent worth. Colonel Whitfield smiled. "How about today?" The studio lights burned hot against Samantha's skin. 3 weeks into her new role at Veterans Horizon, and here she sat across from Diane Kepler, host of the nation's most watched morning show. The makeup artist had spent 40 minutes transforming. Her face, the stylist another hour on her hair and outfit. The result was a version of herself Samantha barely recognized in the monitor, polished, poised, almost elegant. "We're back with Samantha Miller," Diane said to the camera, her smile practiced but warm. The waitress whose act of kindness toward a homeless veteran sparked a national conversation about dignity and compassion. The red light blinked, millions watching. Samantha's hands remained folded in her lap, steadier than she'd expected. "Samantha, you've shared how that night at the diner changed your life," Diane continued. "But what we don't know is what led you to that moment. What made you see Robert when others might have looked away?" The question hung in the air between them. Samantha had rehearsed her answers with the Veterans Horizon PR team, uplifting, inspirational responses that would further their mission. But sitting here, under lights that seemed to strip away pretense, a different answer rose to her lips. "I saw my father," she said simply. Diane leaned forward slightly, sensing the shift. "Your father?" Samantha nodded, feeling something unravel. Inside her, a knot of privacy she'd carried for years, now loosening in the strange intimacy of national television. "My father was a Marine, Gulf War." Her voice remained steady, though her heart raced. "He came home different. That's how my mother always described it." Your daddy came home different. In the control room, producers sensed the moment, signaling camera 2 for a closer shot of Samantha's face, capturing the subtle play of emotion across features that had become familiar to millions. PTSD wasn't something people talked about back then, at least not in our town. He self-medicated. Lost his job, lost our home. The memories surfaced like photographs, snapshots of a childhood abruptly ended. By the time I was 15, we were living in our car. Diane's expression softened with genuine surprise. You were homeless? For 11 months and 13 days. Samantha had never shared this count with anyone. My mother worked multiple jobs. I dropped out of school to work too. We showered at truck stops, ate when we could. The studio had fallen completely silent. Even the cameraman stood motionless, transfixed. My father left one night, said he was a burden, that we'd be better off. Her voice finally wavered. They found him 3 days later, under a bridge. Exposure, they said. The admission hung in the air, raw, unfiltered truth beneath the studio lights. So when I saw Robert at that counter, counting out those $2, Samantha's eyes were dry now, clear with purpose. I wasn't just seeing a stranger, I was seeing every veteran who comes home to a country that thanks them for their service but looks away from their suffering. Across America, living rooms fell silent. In break rooms and waiting areas, on phones and tablets, millions watched as Samantha Miller's story peeled back another layer. A veteran in Kansas City wiped his eyes discreetly. A teenager in Portland recorded the segment to show her history teacher. A congressman in Washington, D.C., paused with his coffee cup midway to his mouth, listening with uncharacteristic attention. After my father died, someone helped us, Samantha continued, finding strength in vulnerability. A diner owner in a small town gave my mother a job with flexible hours. Let me do homework in a booth during slow times. Didn't ask questions when we arrived in clothes we'd worn for days. Diane's practiced interviewer's mask had slipped, revealing genuine emotion. And that's why you became a waitress? Samantha smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. That's why I noticed Robert. That's why I'll always notice. The camera pulled back slightly, capturing both women in frame. One in designer clothes, one in an outfit borrowed for the occasion, connected in this moment by something authentic that transcended the artifice of television. Your new role at Veterans Horizon, Diane said after a moment, reclaiming her professional composure. How does it feel to go from serving meals to serving a mission? It feels like coming full circle, Samantha replied. Like everything, even the hardest parts of my life, was preparation for this work. As the segment concluded, as the producers signaled its success, as social media erupted with a fresh wave of support, Samantha felt something settle within her. The shame she'd carried for years of poverty, of her father's struggles, of her interrupted education, had transformed into something else entirely. Not just a story of kindness captured on camera, but a testament to how pain, witnessed and honored, could become purpose. 1 year later, Samantha stood at the podium, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Behind her, the ribbons stretched across the entrance of Second Chance Cafe, a hybrid coffee shop and veteran resource center located just 2 blocks from where Millie's Diner still served its regular customers. This isn't just my dream, she said, gesturing to the renovated warehouse space where veterans could find not only hot meals, but job training, counseling, and community. This belongs to every person who watched that security footage and decided to be part of something bigger. In the front row, Robert sat with his sister and her family, his posture relaxed, his eyes clear. The hospital bracelet was long gone, replaced by a watch given to him by his peer support group after his 6-month sobriety milestone. Beside him sat Colonel Whitfield, nodding with approval as Samantha spoke. What had begun as a private moment between a waitress and a veteran had in 12 months transformed into a movement that defied cynicism. The hashtag #FeedOneVet had first appeared 3 days after Samantha's television interview. What started as a simple challenge, buy a meal for one veteran, had evolved into community refrigerators stocked with free food outside VA hospitals, restaurants offering pay-it-forward programs for veterans in need, and corporate sponsorships, funding meal delivery to homebound former service members. Digital algorithms that once spread division now amplified compassion as social media platforms tracked the hashtag's spread across continents and languages. In Seoul, a restaurant owner, inspired by Samantha's story, started a program for aging Korean War veterans. In London, a coffee shop placed a designated veterans table where former soldiers could find not only free food but companionship. In Melbourne, university students created an app connecting food banks with veterans struggling with food insecurity. The ripples continued outward, touching shores Samantha would never see. "Robert Martinez," Samantha called from the podium. "Would you join me for the honors?" Robert rose, climbing the steps to stand beside her. Gone was the haunted man who had counted $2 bills at a diner counter. In his place stood Veterans Horizon's newest program director, overseeing transitional housing for homeless veterans with mental health challenges. Together, they cut the ribbon as cameras flashed and the crowd applauded. Inside the cafe, the walls displayed photographs, veterans of different eras, genders, backgrounds, not defined by their struggles, but honored for their service and their humanity. And in the center, encased in simple glass, hung a framed security camera still. A waitress and a veteran at a counter, captured in grainy black and white. Neither, aware they were being recorded, a moment that might have remained private, now preserved as Genesis. The evening news led with the cafe opening, the anchor's voice, measured but warm. What began as an act of kindness caught on camera has evolved into a national movement addressing veteran homelessness and mental health. The Second Chance Cafe, funded by donations and staffed partly by veterans in recovery, opened its doors today. In living rooms across America, viewers watched as Robert and Samantha toured the facility, showcasing not just the cafe, but the counseling room's computer lab and community space behind it. "We're not just feeding people," Samantha explained to the interviewer. "We're creating belonging. We're seeing each other." The camera lingered on a wall where visitors had written responses to a simple question: "What does dignity mean to you?" As dusk settled over the city, Samantha locked up the cafe after its successful first day. Robert had left hours earlier for his daughter's soccer game, a relationship slowly mending through patience and presence. Samantha paused on the sidewalk, looking back at the illuminated sign, a coffee cup with a rising sun inside it, the Veterans Horizon logo subtly incorporated. Her phone buzzed with messages from well-wishers, from her mother who would visit next week, from strangers touched by a story that refused to fade from public consciousness. One notification stood out. A text from Herbert Milligan, who had transformed Millie's Diners policy after the viral video. "Marty asked me to tell you the Veterans Meal Program served its 10,000th free meal today. Your ripple keeps spreading." Samantha smiled, tucking the phone away as she began her walk home. Above her, stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, countless points of light, each invisible during daylight, yet essential to illuminating the night, like acts of kindness, like moments of dignity, like decisions made when we think no one is watching. One silent moment, caught on camera, changed 2 lives and reminded millions of the power of kindness. Would you do the same if no one was watching? Like if this story touched you, Comment your thoughts or experiences with unexpected kindness. Subscribe to Heartstrings and Secrets for more moments that prove humanity still has hope.